Emotions are just neurological responses. They're chemical reactions, essentially.
What would life be like if you didn't have that at all?
Treat any conversation like a tennis match, right? So I hit the ball to you, then you're going to hit the ball back to me. And we just want to keep the rally going.
If you can consciously walk into a room and not give a shit about the titles and what people quote unquote are and are not.
Externalize my focus from what do people think about me?
Is that a good thing? Is it a bad thing? How do you feel about some of what does it take for a coal to become a diamond? Pressure.
How are we doing?
I'm good. I feel like I have so much to talk about.
Yeah, you were about to go right into it. So what did you see? What did you hear?
So Casey and I listen to armchair expert Dax Shepard's podcast like all the time. Mm-hmm. And their most recent one, they had a diagnosed sociopath on there. And I feel like most people's immediate reaction when I tell them like, oh, there was a sociopath on Dax Shepard, there's this like sort of pause, not maybe quite like negative response, but just very much like, oh, a sociopath.
Difference between socio and psychopath real quick.
To my knowledge, sociopath basically doesn't feel emotions, doesn't compute emotions. So she really much, in her discussion, it was very much like, she has no guilt, she has no shame. She doesn't have a problem with lying and it's fine. Doesn't feel like her feelings don't get hurt. So she's very just neutral about everything. But she's also a doctor. So she now studies, I think it's called secondary sociopathy. It's so hard to say.
That's so interesting.
Anyway, a big part of it was just discussing quote unquote normal people who have to live with this. Not everybody is like
a killer.
Yeah, that's not it at all. There's plenty of people who live with this, and actually plenty of people who don't even know that they have it. And so,
are you living with a sociopath?
No.
You're not, but
when she's going through all of the characteristics and traits and everything, I'm like, am I a sociopath? Like, am I on the spectrum? Because I feel like everything is a spectrum.
Yeah.
And when she's discussing things, I'm like, well, I went through a phase where I was quite destructive and didn't care. I definitely lied and had no conscience about it for a very long time. I didn't care if it hurt anybody or anything. And I was talking to Casey about it then. Am I on the spectrum here? Are both of us on the spectrum here a little bit? She's like, wait.
Yeah.
She's like, if Atlas got mad at you and didn't talk to you for a week, you would be devastated. Right. And I'm like, okay, that's a good benchmark for if I'm a sociopath or not.
It's so funny. People, when they hear sociopath stories, it's I knew you were going to say, am I a sociopath?
Of course.
Everybody is like, because honestly, it borderline sounds a little bit nice because it's the beauty and challenge of so much of life. I had the same thing.
Just being human. I already listened to the episode twice. It just got dropped on Tuesday. And I was like, I have to listen to this twice.
Why are you so interested in it?
I think, well, the first time around, I honestly, I was driving and felt like I missed some things. But then I'm just so fascinated by navigating life without having shame or guilt or anger or fear. She talked about her childhood and that she would walk around San Francisco at night at like 8 years old and peer and peek into people's garages and go through it and get a glimpse like into their life without them knowing, and how like exhilarating it was, and no fear walking around San Francisco at the streets of San Francisco at night as an 8-year-old. And she talked about this one time she got caught and this guy was like, hey, what are you doing? And she said she walked out and was like in the moonlight, and he saw like, oh, it was a child. It's an 8-year-old. And she just goes, shh, we're playing hide and seek, and ran off. And I was like, oh my God.
That's such a good response.
I know.
If some child said that to me and I caught her, I'd be like,
oh, yeah.
Where's the seeker?
And just that idea of navigating life with zero fear. I think that was the big thing that really stuck with me. Like, what would life be like if you didn't have that at all?
I want to go to that, but you also said that she said it was exhilarating.
Yeah.
Can they feel that?
She didn't have the words for it back then, but now looking back, she was like, yeah. She also talked about as a child, she stabbed another kid in the head with a pencil at school.
Damn.
And that again, at the time, she didn't have the words for it. And she later in life, I don't know what exactly she feels because she doesn't feel shame. She talked about how it felt good, essentially. And she's like, that's when I knew there was something potentially very different about me. She understood enough, at least at that age, to know, like, oh, probably stabbing a kid in the head with a pencil shouldn't feel great.
Damn.
Yeah. So it's weird. Again, this is why I listen to it so many times, because I don't have a deep understanding of being a sociopath and not having emotions. But it's like, if you don't feel the guilt, the fear, the shame, the anger, the sadness, like what is actually going on inside of you when these things happen?
Like physiologically what's happening, because emotions are just like neurological responses, right? So they're chemical reactions essentially. So are those chemical reactions not happening? So then do they feel motivation, right? Because motivation is also like a dopamine release. So like if she gets an A on a test, is she like completely flat?
Yeah, she talked about graduating and how everybody was like super excited and they're like, aren't you excited? And she's like, no.
That's so weird because also, like, I'm not a scientist, but dopamine is responsible for our feelings of motivation. It helps us like get up and show up here to do this podcast, right? So they must have that, but then they have an absence of other things.
Aside from, oh, am I a sociopath thoughts?
Uh-huh.
On the drive in, I thought this morning with us, because on the episode, because she doesn't feel these things, she talked about how people feel open to basically release kind of their darkest thoughts onto her because there's going to be absolutely no judgment from her, none whatsoever.
Is she a therapist?
She is a therapist or was a therapist. Yeah, I mean, I think she's a therapist and then works with sociopaths. It's so crazy. The test to find out if you're a sociopath, you don't know that it's happening because you have to have a conversation and you have to ask the right questions, but the person can't know that you're asking those questions.
Interesting.
Yeah, they can't know the questions in advance. Otherwise, they know there's a test. So it was like very interesting how she talks people through it.
Well, I feel fear, so I
know.
mean, it is what it is.
Yeah. But it made me think about, I know we sort of have a quote unquote checkered past.
Mm-hmm.
And do we hide that darkness? Do we share that darkness? Where's the boundary or the line of maybe needing to release it sometimes? Like, I know I've shared some things with you that I'm like, I think I just need to get this out. Mm-hmm. Is that a good thing? Is it a bad thing? How do you feel about some of your darkest moments? Or do you care to share any of those moments? And what did you learn from it? How did you grow from it? What were those times like? What was going on in your head? What did you feel after some of those moments? It just made it just spurned all of these thoughts and feelings about some of those checkered moments.
I mean, I feel like it's really important to have people in your life that you can share those moments with, because that's part of processing, right? But I think that it's also like meeting people where they're at. So oversharing is also a real thing.
Yes.
Like you don't need to share your checkered past with everybody. Not everybody deserves to or is capable or even willing to like hold that space for you, right?
Right.
But I know I have people in my life that I would tell, if you asked me probably off air about like anything, I'd tell you because you're one of my friends that can hold space for that. If that's something that that will help me.
I agree. No, I agree with that. You know, I feel like you swing the pendulum a lot. Like, I think as humans, we tend to overcorrect when we're doing something.
Where do you naturally, do you fall on the side of undersharing or oversharing?
Probably oversharing, but not as much as I used to. I'm also just external vocal processor. So when there was that time period where I was processing a lot of my life, say through therapy or whatever it may have been, I had to externalize some of that. Luckily, by that point, I had Casey, so a lot of that would go to her. But then sometimes just in random, I also bring this up because last night we had the event at the studio and lots of people. I had to mingle, had to small talk, also got into some deep talks, which was cool. But I can sort of catch myself in real time, step out of my body and be like, am I talking about too much here right now? And I'll evaluate in the moment, like check in with the person's body language. I tend to get into a little more hypervigilance in those moments because I have been an oversharer in the past. So I'm a little more cognizant of it now. Like I need to stop talking. And so I was checking in last night a lot. That's why I'm bringing a lot of this up now. Because I just went through it last night, right after the sociopath episode. And then checking in last night as I'm having all these new conversations with people. And, yeah.
What helps, because I'm the opposite, right? So in an attempt to be less of an undersharer, I have swung on the oversharing side, and I had to learn, like, wait, what is the right balance here? And analogy that stuck with me was like, treat any conversation like a tennis match, right? So I hit the ball to you, then you're going to hit the ball back to me, and we just want to keep the rally going.
That's great. I love that analogy.
That just helps me always. I'm
using that one
because I'll sit there in a conversation. My de facto like mode of being is I'll just sit here and listen. I will listen to you for 45 minutes. And I'm really good at interacting with you through my facial expressions and like keeping you going with, I'm interacting with you. I'm just not saying a fucking word. But that's like, that's not appropriate for all settings, especially small talk. So in small talk, I'm like, okay, we're in a rally right now. And that's
so you probably like it then when people aren't asking you questions within the conversation. Like you're fine just listening. And
I'm more than fine. I have a whole world going on in my head. Like I like to share, like I'm sitting here on a fucking podcast with you. Like I don't mind, but like I'm very selective. I don't know, just naturally. Maybe that's a trauma response. Maybe it's my personality. I have no idea. But I've always naturally been very selective about who I share what's going on.
But you are very curious about people.
Love.
You're right.
Yeah. See, I don't not want to interact with people. I just like love asking you about you.
Yeah.
But then if you do get me talking, and I think that's probably the case with a lot of introverts, like I can fucking go in on some shit.
I know I can go. I caught myself last night. I was like, stop, like ask a question. Yeah. But then I also noticed too, I'm like, well, maybe the person who was talking to me and listening to me, maybe I actually was interesting and they just wanted to listen and hear everything that I had to say.
Yeah. Yeah. I can keep the conversation going by just asking questions, but at the end of the conversation, I could talk to somebody for an hour and they would know nothing about me. Right. Because I would have just asked them questions. And people love that, right? Like people love sharing about themselves, but part of the volley is like sharing about yourself as well, and that's something that I have to practice.
Yeah.
And I pretty much always feel self-conscious about those parts of the conversation afterwards. And so I also have to practice like not reliving the conversation, be like, did I fucking say the right things? Like what do they think about what I said? Like I said what I fucking said.
Yeah, exactly. It's just totally.
Yeah.
I felt that last night. I also realized a lot of people, they're like, one guy particularly was really asking questions about photography and branding and wanting to pick my brain. And I'm like, oh, I'm in this position now. And I think for a long time, I wasn't comfortable in that position of being the person looked to as quote unquote a thought leader within this like multimedia space, and this studio. And so I had to very much settle into that position last night. And I hadn't had to do it for basically ever since I've been in the studio, because I've never really had a social event like that where lots of random people are coming in to network because I had the kids and just didn't have the time until last night. So it's very much a test of my adaptability last night, having not been in that scene for a very long time and having to be one of the people looked at as a quote unquote leader of the networking event,
Let's talk about imposter syndrome a little bit. So we've talked about it in the past, but I heard a quote or read something recently that I loved. I think that imposter syndrome's two-sided. So One, it's like getting your first job. It's so fucking hard because you need experience to get experience. It's like, what? Give me this job. You want me to have experience, but this is the experience, right? So it's a chicken or the egg situation. And imposter syndrome is the same, right? Like, in order to get good at the thing, you just need to do it and get over and move through the fact that you feel like you don't belong. The way that you belong is by doing it. On the other side of it is, it's not blanket, oh, it's imposter syndrome, I'm just gonna affirm myself that I belong. No, you feel imposter syndrome because you're not good enough yet.
And you don't know your shit.
You don't know your shit.
You're inexperienced.
You are inexperienced. That doesn't mean that you don't get to participate, but you're feeling that because your insides are telling you that you have a fucking ways to go.
Yeah.
So get to it.
Right.
So I love both sides of that coin. And
man, it's also to me a huge lesson in detaching from the finished product. And that finished product is yourself within that industry or with whatever leap you're taking or advancement, or maybe it's a promotion within a job or your next level of entrepreneurship. We've talked about it previously of staying focused and present with the process. I think that's where it's much easier to detach from the imposter syndrome, because you stay attached to just the process and not what your outcome needs to be, or not the person that you need to become. Also, if you understand who you are on a more soul level and spirit level, I think it's easier to detach from the identity of that the physical identity of what you need to be, whether it's entrepreneurship or me, a content creator or videographer or filmmaker or whatever it is. I think when you can detach from the physical identity, it becomes easier to focus on the process to get you to where you want to go. Okay, let's use my example when I just left personal training and moved into photography. So I had a huge identity shift there. I was attached to the identity of personal trainer to the degree where my wife was like, hey, you don't have to wear athletic gear all the time anymore. So she's like, you don't have to wear those sweatpants from Outdoor Voices anymore. Like legit, I was like going out in the evenings with them on. So in my mind wants to wrap me up in this old identity of personal trainer. And it's like, oh no, now I have to become a photographer. So then instead of me focusing on what are the steps to become that photographer, or what are the steps to just start working on that craft and becoming better at that craft, I was focused on, oh, I need to let go of these clothes that make me a personal trainer. I need to figure out what I have to do to become a better photographer. I need to tell people I'm a photographer. I feel uncomfortable telling people I'm a photographer. It was all about just the name and the identity of that, instead of focusing on, oh, let's just work on lighting, or let's just figure out how to use my camera, or figure out the best editing process. And I think that lended itself to taking longer in the process.
Yeah.
Because I was wasting so much energy on like feeling uncomfortable about becoming a photographer.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Like, basically, like the what will people think shit.
Exactly.
How do I describe myself, look like it, talk like it, seem like it?
Present myself as a photographer instead of just presenting myself as Logan.
Yeah.
And this is something that I happen to do that I'm working on to become better at.
And also just stacking up the photography skills, because that's what makes you a photographer.
Exactly.
Yeah, for sure.
In the early stages of walking into a room of, say, a lot of content creators or videographers or photographers or whatever, whenever I was networking or around those other people, I just got so uncomfortable. And I think that's what happens with people is when the imposter syndrome kicks in, they're like, well, I'm not this. You're identifying with just a title, essentially. But you're not any of those things. You're just you. And so if you know how to connect more to your being, then you're also not so concerned about what everybody else is. And then you can just connect with their being and lose all the titles. Like if you can consciously walk into a room and not give a shit about the titles and what people quote unquote are and are not, then it's much easier to connect with them on a soul level and just have really good conversation that essentially will help you along your path of mastery in whatever field that you're in.
This reminds me of, this is something that I struggle always have struggled with. But it reminds me of when I gave up drinking and smoking. When I would go into a social setting because I didn't have those tools to numb or make me kind of...
Let's call them crutches instead of
crutches,
tools, because
yeah.
I don't think they're tools.
Crutches to change how I felt, you know, be more extroverted, whatever. I had to like relearn how to show up. Mm-hmm. And the lens that really, really helped me was I'm showing up to pour into other people, to help somebody else, to serve the situation, to add more to the situation. Mm-hmm. Kind of externalize my focus from what do people think about me to like, how can I make Logan feel good today?
Right.
And so I completely stopped thinking about myself and I start thinking about the other people in the room. Mm-hmm. And then now I can kind of flow through the room freely. And since I'm in that energy, like nobody cares what my title is.
Exactly.
Nobody even ever asked me what my fucking title is.
Nobody cares.
Nobody gives
Nobody
a
cares.
Shit. They care about how they feel interacting with
Only
you.
Your own insecurity and self-consciousness cares about what your title is or who you are, quote unquote.
Totally. And it's like kind of weird to just drop your title in a conversation.
Totally.
You know what I mean?
It's even weird to me last night. Like, I don't like when I introduce myself to somebody, even though this is my studio, I just say, hey, I'm Logan. And then maybe 15 minutes later, they're like, oh, you're the owner of the studio? And I'm like, yeah. They're like, oh, okay. Like,
I swear.
It feels so weird to me to just be like, yeah, this is my studio.
I feel like there's probably something to dig into there as well, because that has that happened to me all the time. They'd be like, I remember meeting, we had like an influencer meetup at our HQ, and like 30 minutes in, this group of girls were like, oh, you're the CEO? And I'm like, yeah. And our influencer marketing manager was like, yeah, he's the co-founder. And they were like, oh my God, we had no idea. We didn't know who you were. And I'm like, well,
why would you?
I'm not walking around just saying like, hello, I'm the CEO. Hello, I'm the CEO. Like that's fucking lame.
I'm gonna name drop real quick. But when I had Chris Williamson in here the other day, he's like meeting the guys from High Performance and introducing himself, yada, yada. And then I kind of come in after the fact. So I was like making a coffee or something for one of them. And I stroll in, I'm just kind of like filming. And Darian was like, hey, did you meet Chris yet? And I was like, oh, no. And then Chris was like, hey, nice to meet you, blah, blah, blah. He actually made a comment of like, you sound British. And I was like, really? Like, oh, interesting. I'm not, but thanks.
Thanks.
And that was it. And it was just like, okay, nice to meet you. And we're like getting set up and everything. And then he has to go use the bathroom. And I was like, yeah, let me walk you down there. So we're walking down the hall. He said something, and within the context, I was just like, oh yeah, my wife has this half of the suite. And so we share this suite. And I could just hear there was like silence. And he's like, oh, wait a second. Is that your studio back there then? And I was like, yeah, I own that studio. He's like, oh, okay. And like, didn't put it together. Which was totally fine with me. But in that moment, I very much was like, should I be saying that I own this place when people walk in? That just feels so weird.
I don't know, but I had a meeting with a CEO the other week. And when he introduced himself, he said, I'm Dimitri. I'm the founder and CEO of this company. You know, we've raised this many millions of dollars. And like, he stated the things very like matter of fact. And I heard it. And I was like, he's just communicating to me who he is, what his role in the conversation is, right? So that I have context. And there was no ego involved. He was just stating facts. And I was like, I stored that because I was like, oh, that felt really good to receive. Yeah. So I wonder how I can borrow that in the future. So
probably something I need to work on.
I think so.
Obviously.
Yeah.
I mean, if I'm evaluating last night's event and thinking about the mingling, it's like, I wonder how many people actually knew this was my studio.
And that's important.
Which is important. It is. Yeah.
That's the fucking point of
having the whole point of having the event. So people come here and use it and know that it's here and exists.
Going back to the fact that neither of us are sociopaths, we clearly feel fear and anxiety and all those things because that's what we're talking about, right?
You almost made me spit up my coffee, man.
I'm not. Facts.
I have feelings.
The title of this episode, we are not sociopaths.
And we are two men talking about feelings. So I think that's very clear we're not sociopaths.
Very clear. Yeah, we're absolutely not.
But it did also go into then lending itself to potential narcissism, which could be a whole different podcast.
Is that the opposite of sociopath?
No, I think it was just, is there overlap in sociopath and narcissism? Or if you're maybe not one, could you possibly be the other? I don't remember exactly how the context of the conversation, but.
Okay.
Oh, and one was like, what would be quote unquote better or worse to be, a sociopath or a narcissist?
Okay, so remember oversharing, undersharing. If I'm naturally undersharing, I kind of overextended into oversharing at some points. As it relates to like sharing that you're the owner of the studio or whatever like your title is, I think that you're proud of being the owner of the studio, right?
Yes.
Like I'm proud of my role as well. And I wonder if not sharing that is kind of overextending on the other side of that feeling, right? So like maybe you are really proud to be the owner of this studio, but you don't want to seem prideful in the conversation, so you overextend in the other direction.
That's a good point.
And you don't share it at all.
That's a good point. I probably overcorrect too far.
Yeah,
that
something
way.
like that.
I've been told actually by a mentor that I need to stop being so humble. And there's a way to do that without swinging it again too far the other way into, say, narcissism. But I have been told that my humbleness is almost a weakness. Yeah.
The word humility, I have found, triggers some people.
Really?
Yeah.
Can you give me an example?
I think
of why
humility
what did
is
they
like
say?
humility is like probably a core value of mine, not formally, but I think about it a lot.
What's the quote? Humility is not thinking less of yourself; it's thinking of yourself less.
So I think that's what's I don't know the quote, but I think that's what's triggering about it, because some people that I've talked to about the word feel like humility is almost like debasing themselves a little bit. It's like they think the opposite of humility is pride, but I don't think that's true.
Would it be
Humility-
arrogance on the other side of humility?
Okay, so if humility is down the center, right, then to the right, far end of the spectrum, you probably have like excessive pride, right? And on the other side, I don't know the right word, but let's call it meekness or a lack of confidence.
Yeah.
Disbelief, right?
Yeah.
Something to that effect where you think less of yourself.
Yeah.
So it's like both ends of the spectrum are ego at play,
Right.
right? It's ego inflated in two different directions that make you think too much of yourself or too little of yourself. And for me, I think humility is right down the middle. Like, in order for me to improve and become better, I have to have humility, right? In order for me to learn from my mistakes, see my faults, I have to humble myself before that instance.
It made me think real quick. I've heard before in the past of a great way. Actually, I think it was maybe in Eckhart Tolle in New Earth, to keep your ego in check or to understand if your ego is coming into play. Essentially, it's, are you putting yourself above or below any other human being, including yourself? Essentially what you're talking about with humility, staying right in the middle.
Staying in the middle, yeah.
Which is what I felt last night, rounding this out a little bit, when I'm mingling and going through this crowd of people here. There's probably that bit of overcorrection where I'm consciously thinking I don't want to put myself above anybody or have them feel like I'm above them because I'm saying I'm the owner of this studio. And maybe you're just like somebody who's thinking about starting a podcast, and possibly I'm putting too much care into their feelings when I don't need to, because I don't want them to feel like, oh, Logan he's got this great studio and he's doing so much podcasting here, and he has the Skinny Confidential come through here, and Chris Williamson was just here, and oh my God, I'm just like this little person that's like thinking about starting a podcast, which I don't even know if that's what they're thinking. So for me, it's like you said, I need to stop overcorrecting that far and just be authentic and share who I am and what I do here.
And how somebody is impacted by what you share about yourself is not really your responsibility.
It's not at all.
Unless your intention
100%.
was to hurt them.
No.
Right? If like you're genuinely communicating your truth, then that's their responsibility, right?
Right.
And if I think of like everything, all of my behavior and everything that I say as a lighthouse to attract my people, right? Whether I want them as friends or business partners, then I have to share my authentic self. And part of that for me is like a very intense energy about certain things. Like in my own mind and in my own day-to-day life, like I'm incredibly intense with myself. Like for the wrong people, it's extremely demotivating. But it's not because I'm demotivating you, that person. It's because they probably feel a threatened energy by it. It probably makes them feel less about themselves. And I'm very aware of that, which is why I've like over humbled myself and prevented myself from sharing like the energy that genuinely fires me up. I prevented myself from sharing that because I don't want to make other people feel bad about themselves. Like kind of the cultural conversation right now is like very anti-hustle culture and like, you know, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I get that and I respect that. My best friend and my brother are like not hustle culture people. They're not ultra ambitious and I love them. And like my role in my relationships with them is like, I light them up with like what I'm fired up about and they appreciate me for that. But I'm also like not making that an expectation of them.
Right.
And so I'm trying to practice that in like my day-to-day life on this podcast, like and in general, where I fucking wake up at 3 and 4 in the morning because it's time to get to fucking work, baby. It's time to fucking work. Like nobody else is bringing this heat. Like I'm bringing this heat with myself. And maybe they are. And I want those people in my life to fucking push me. Like one of my best friends right now is my boss. And me and him, like I fucking lit him up yesterday morning because he didn't deliver on some shit. And I was like, these are the fucking consequences of us not delivering on time with our partners. Like they lose trust in us and like we'll rub each other the wrong way, but then we'll fucking hug it out because we're like, yes. Yeah. When I do some shit like that, I want you to call me out for it. And when you do something, like I texted him this morning, I'm like, because we got out of meetings at like 9:30 last night and I knew he had a training session left because he has a goal of winning the CrossFit Games. I texted him this morning. I was like, did you train last night? He did train last night, but I'm letting him know I'm watching you, motherfucker.
I know. I love it when I wake up to text from you in the morning because, you know, ideally I'm up at 5. Sometimes it stretches to 6 depending on the kids. Yeah. But it's honestly one of my favorite moments when I look at my phone. I'm like, all right, we're starting this Faiez shit right now. Hey, let's go. Let's go. Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you, how would you rate yourself like on a scale of 1 to 10, how you showed up in the last week? I give myself a 6, to be honest.
I hate to ride your coattails here, but I think I'm probably around a 6.5 maybe. I didn't feel great about this past week or this. Are we talking about this week or last week? Or whatever. From Wednesday to Wednesday?
Let's say the last 3 to 7 days.
Maybe a 7. You know, who? You
cannot pick 7.
Who? No,
that's a rule of mine. You can't pick 7. You
6.5 then.
Okay, 6.5.
Yeah. On another random podcast, I heard somebody talk about they had categories that they would rate on 1 to 10. And I don't remember exactly what they were, but it was like family, work.
Yeah, let's hit it.
Time management.
So my 6 is dragged down because I legitimately spent like, I think 3 or 4 days in resentment towards Heather.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Like on Wednesday. So she was having a bad week. And like she was already feeling bad about herself. And I was holding space for her for a while. And she was aware. She was like, I know I'm not my best self right now. I'm like trying to figure it out. But then she called me and she like asked for some feedback on something. And I gave her my feedback. And then she was like, that didn't motivate me. I need to feel motivated right now. I'm getting off the phone. And I was like, what the fuck? You just fucking called me and asked me for my fucking opinion. And so like, I felt bad and I had to write an inventory about it. And I was like, I basically felt like I wasn't good enough in that moment. Like she was asking me for feedback. She didn't say, I need you to motivate me. I would have answered differently.
Yeah.
But I felt like, you know, a little bit, I felt shitty about that. And
then you're supposed to read her brain.
I was supposed to read her brain. And I brought it up to her the next day and she told me like, you know, she was still not in a good spot and like what she said to me was not what I wanted to hear. So now I was resentful squared. And then we went to dinner with some friends on Friday.
Which is so great.
I was still resentful towards her. And so I was just like, she said some things and I was like, man, I was just getting more and more irritated. And so on Saturday, I just fucking stonewalled. I like didn't say anything, but I knew, I was like, okay, I know we need to talk about this. So whatever, Sunday we talked, fucking blew up in the morning. We tried again in the evening. It all worked out. Like we were able to get through, process, get on the same page, like understand how one another felt. But that was, I legitimately, now that I map it out, spent 4 or 5 days in like genuine resentment. So not as quick of a rebound as I'd like. And I was super aware. I was like, man,
that's what's so funny about it is like, we know we're doing it. That's why I laugh, because I probably a few months back was in like the same position.
And it was silly shit. It was silly shit. What? She wanted to feel motivated on a phone call and I didn't motivate her. So I spent 5 days being pissed off. Yeah. But I'm proud of myself because like, I knew it, and we eventually got there. So not everybody does.
That's all. Yeah, as long as you get there, that's all that matters.
Like literally, not everybody does. Some people will just keep on going, and it stews, and it like genuinely changes your belief about the situation and other people, because you're like finding excuses, and it's like, dude, none of that is true.
Well, you're going through your own confirmation bias in your head for those 3 or 4 days to confirm your side of the story or your side of the argument, instead of just being like, let's just get back to harmony.
Yeah, let's get back. Okay, so that was a huge contributor to my 6. So what about you?
Relationship was good. That was good.
Okay, good.
Actually, we had our first, so a long-standing battle with me and Casey has been her social media. And I've been telling her for years, hey, you need to start doing it. Like, you have valuable information. You have value. You're an expert. What you're doing is different than everybody else. Like, you need to share. And her perfectionism would always get in the way. She's like, oh, well, I've done the research and I see this will work and that. And how should I make this video? And what text should I use? And blah, 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 blah. And then I'm like, just start making videos. Like anything. Yeah. I don't care. Like, just do anything. And that was the battle for, no joke, like 2 years. And then finally she got rid of that block, had the release of that. So for the last 2.5 months, as you know, we've been doing her YouTube. You've been seeing her post pretty much every day now on Instagram. She's completely past the block. And now it is in that refinement stage of like really figuring out what's working, what's not. And she's been on me about wanting me to film B-roll at home with a good camera, not just the iPhone. And I had to get over sort of my block of, because I went through 2 years of like telling her to get this done. And she's like, I need your help. But the miscommunication was like, she wanted help, but I needed her to kind of meet me in a spot of like, bring some creativity with you, bring some ideas, and then I'll mesh with that and we'll figure it out. Anyway, my point being, finally this weekend, we had our first like B-roll shoot where she brought me a few ideas. Like literally, I'm like, just go one layer deep. Like if you're saying you want a shot of you walking around, where do you want to be walking around? Like that's all I need, like a little bit more. So we had an awesome B-roll shoot at the house this weekend.
Okay.
Kids were asleep, or May, our nanny, I think, had them for a little bit, knocked that out. For her YouTube videos that we had to shoot on Sunday, she's like, hey, if you can take both kids to swimming, Atlas had swimming, and his swim lessons now don't require me to be in the pool. So she's like, if you can take both kids and set up the cameras, I'll record the YouTube videos. And I'm like, yes, let's do it.
Cool.
So I felt like that was like a huge system that with 2 kids, both of us were like quite proud of. I'm like, oh shit, we just got like 4 YouTube videos shot. I took the kids to swimming. We got all your B-roll done on the weekend, and we had birthday parties for Atlas to go to, like all this kid stuff to do. And we still were able to like knock out all that content too. Felt really good. I was like, all right, I think we're both past this like block of our collaborative creation into her content. Like we kind of had to go through the growing pains of it. And the first growing pain was just fucking start doing it. And then now it's like figuring out the systems that work, the timing that works, the scheduling that works. She's getting more comfortable on camera. I actually saw those videos and I think I could tell she was a little more free and open because I wasn't standing there watching, which is great and not so great in a way, because there are certain things I need to start her over on. Like I can catch the flow of the video.
Sure.
And when it comes to like editing, having her restart at certain points, but that's more like technical stuff. But I could just tell her energy was different without me standing there. So maybe that's something we do. Anyway, that was a long tangent on that. I felt like a high score for the weekend. If I'm doing it in categories, was like, man, we managed through a lot of that. My low score comes with just my productivity at the studio felt a little low. Like I got her video out late yesterday. I didn't get it dropped at 10 a.m. I still haven't even put out a reel for our second episode that we dropped, or episode 1 technically. Now I almost wish we hadn't done episode 0, because now I'm like, oh, it's the second episode, but it's episode 1. Blah.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Episode number, who gives a fuck?
Yeah, exactly. And just like little admin things, I'm trying to touch up some stuff on my webpage. So truthfully, it was just, I felt like a low score in my productivity at work. But I also try to give myself grace, because I'm like, I had a bunch of kids stuff to do, and that score was very high with them over the weekend. So I was saying on another podcast I heard, it's better to categorize your scores instead of just one overall score. And I would say in many categories, say kid category or content category with Kaysen, I feel like I knocked those out of the park the last week. But then in productivity at work, maybe a little lower.
I totally agree with that. And I like to, you got to battle the feeling of shame around low scores whenever they come, but like a key thing for me is to still document that low score. So for example, I'm a productivity nerd. I give myself a score every day. I have for long time. And early and mid 20s, I used to, when I would set a goal and I would start working to that goal, but I wasn't going to achieve it, I would then change the goal. And now, if I've set a Q2 goal and I'm not going to hit it, the goal doesn't change. I have to document how close I got to that goal, because that helps me then evaluate honestly, like whether my execution was poor or whether I set the wrong goal in the first place. For example, like my dad used to call me out. He used to be like, you only share things with me when they're going well. You never share the bad things with me. And that was representative of like how I was with myself as well. I used to kind of brush the bad things under the rug, but then like try to overly emphasize the good things in my brain, which is good. Like I want to emphasize the good things, but also be able to just objectively see the low scores for what they are. Like if I look back and in March, I kind of racked up a bunch of 5s on my relationship. Like what's going on there?
Yeah.
Versus if I was like, I'm just going to leave this blank.
Yeah.
I'm just going to leave it blank because I don't actually want to write a 3 out of 10 there. It's going to make me feel bad about myself.
You need reference points.
You need those reference points.
Yeah.
And it seems really simple, but I know a lot of people that don't even set goals. They don't even set goals because they're not even willing to look at themselves in the face, basically.
Yeah.
So I totally agree on the categories. So I got a 6 on the relationship side. I was probably lower than a 5. I was probably a 4 out of 10 because I spent the majority of the week
it was resentment.
in resentment. Like that's not how I want to be. So, and then I go, there's the note. That's why for you, your relationship was awesome. For you, productivity / professional was on the lower end. For me, probably an 8 out of 10. I felt pretty solid. So the imposter syndrome, if I am consistently trying to grow, then that means I'm always on the fringe of my current skill set. Like if I'm just operating within the skills that I know, then I'm not learning anything new. I may be really valuable to whatever venture I'm a part of within my known skill set, but that's never how I provide value. In everything that I'm a part of, I'm figuring out the next most valuable thing. That's where I provide value, which means I literally don't know how to do shit all the time. Like that's the energy that I'm sitting in professionally, and I'm relied upon on these teams to figure out whatever needs to be figured out.
Yeah.
And so I'm constantly like, I don't know that I'll ever be able to rate myself a 10 out of 10. It's genuinely an 8 out of 10 because I'm really proud of how I showed up. But also there's so much that now looking back in hindsight, I'm like, I need to bridge the gap here, and here because I've learned new information.
Right.
And so I'm like, okay, these are now the known steps to get better. And then I'm going to do those things, and that's going to get me my 8 out of 10 score. But then by doing those things, I'm going to be like, oh shit, this is actually how to how to do it better or whatever it may be. So I like an 8 out of 10 score.
Yeah.
Honestly, there's a bit of humility in that score. They found in leadership rankings that if you ask leaders to rank themselves across several categories on a scale of 1 to 5, the people that rank themselves on a 5 like are horrible leaders. And so I low-key have this knowledge. So if any of my fucking employees listen to this shit and I see you rank yourself on a fucking 5 on your shit, I have one. I have one fucking sales guy in Q1. He fucking missed so many of his targets, and he came back on his core values ranking, and he said, I'm a 5 out of 5 on everything. I'm like, ooh, brother, this is why you are not getting promoted, my boy.
That's so funny. I wanted to touch on something with imposter syndrome real fast, because I have like, it kind of doubles as a win for me, something I'm proud of, something that's helped me move through a bit of imposter syndrome with my next step. As you know, a big part of my journey with this studio and what I want to do next is studio consultations. And I've been blessed enough to do 4 of them now. I potentially have another one coming up on the books. And it was around the beginning of last year that I was like, oh, I'd really like to start doing this. I just kind of was like putting that out into the ether, putting that out into the universe. People were complimenting the studio more. I was like, oh, yeah, maybe this is something I could do. But also in that first moments feeling like there were so many times where I look at this studio every day, and to me, it's just something I've created. I see the beauty in it now more because I've gotten enough compliments about it. But to me, it was always just, I was so focused on the process that I think there was a moment when it reached this point where it took me a minute to appreciate the beauty and have like gratitude for what I've created here. And then once I found that, then I'm like, okay, I can start doing more of these studio consultations. Anyway, my point being, I've done 4 of them now. And every time I upped my rate, and between the first one, but when a guy was talking to me about it, I realized from the first one that I've done and the 4th one that I've done, I 10x'd what I charged. Now, granted, my first one was here in Austin. It was just a couple hours. And my most previous one was in Nashville. I had to fly there and do it. But every time in those 4 that they were asking me, hey, do you do studio consultations? I had to say yes, and felt very uncomfortable still saying it. Like, yes, I do this. Because part of it is then, as you know, you have to deliver. And the difference between charging somebody $500 and $5,000 is a very different delivery that you have to come through with. And I think there was a part of me subconsciously that, I don't want to say doubted, but definitely there was a little uncomfortableness of being like, okay, they're paying me this much. They need to find the value in me. They need to know that I'm worth that much, which means you have to rise to that occasion. And so for me in this last one, I'm pretty sure it tipped me over the edge. It only took 4 to be like, oh, this is what I do now. But it almost, in a way, it took me charging that crazy amount to then actually step into it. I think if I had only just kept charging a lower amount, I'd always feel like, oh, well, I'm not that good. So sometimes I think you need to really step out of your comfort zone. If it is something like a situation where you need to charge a client amount or you want to get those clients where you're making more money, you got to just swing for the fences sometimes.
100%.
You just have to.
If it is in fact an opportunity, you have to say yes and then rise to the occasion.
Yeah.
And that is the problem with people who wait to feel ready before doing anything, because you will never get ready.
You're never ready.
You get ready by committing and being like, holy shit, how do I actually do this now?
Yeah.
And that pressure, you then
figure it out.
You do usually end up figuring it out.
What does it take for a coal to become a diamond? Pressure.
Yeah. Boom. And that is the episode.
Perfect. Yeah. All right, man. Good Wednesday.
Yeah, good Wednesday.
I like that one.
If you like this episode, give us a like, leave us a comment. What'd you like about it? And subscribe to the show. We'll be back next week.
Awesome. We have to start saying this at the beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Next time.
All right, man.
All right. See ya.